Ladies and gentlemen, for our final award today, the Sidney Powers Memorial Award, will you please welcome to the stage the immediate past president of AAPG and another one of my friends who should have his judgment checked, Scott Tinker.
Good afternoon. Paul Weimer was the main organizer for Frank Brown's nomination and is his citationist. For the first time in 30 years, Paul is not attending the annual convention due to illness. He's recovering well, but when last week we spoke, you'll smile when I tell you that his voice was so low and gravelly that it made Lee Marvin sort of sound like Dom DeLuise. As you know, Paul, along with Ernie Mancini, is a candidate for president-elect, and he wishes everyone to have a most successful convention, and he deeply regrets not being here. My job is to try to channel Paul by reading his citation for Frank in the first person as Paul wrote it. So just imagine, if you will, that I'm slightly shorter, have longer red hair, and I'm a lot more intelligent than I actually am, and we'll get to Paul. So ladies and gentlemen, from Paul, this year's Sidney Powers medalist, Dr. Frank Brown, is well known to geoscientists worldwide for his seminal contributions in siliciclastic depositional systems and applying them to seismic stratigraphy, sequence stratigraphy, and coastal studies management. During his 5-decade career, Frank has had global influence as a researcher, a consultant, and a mentor. Frank made these contributions while working at the Bureau of Economic Geology, with a faculty appointment at UT Austin in 57 to 60, Baylor University from 60 to 66, back to the Bureau and UT from 1966 to 89. He was a consultant from 89 to 99, and he came back to the Bureau in 1999 and has been there since. Frank's work has always been done in the public realm. Geoscientists have been able to freely interact with him throughout his career, from which our association has benefited significantly. Frank began his studies of the Pennsylvanian strata on the eastern shelf of the West Texas Basin in 1955 at Standard of California and continued throughout his employment at the Bureau. Frank has been a long-term research initiative on ancient deltas. He began one and all other siliciclastic systems with Bill Fisher. Their work led to the concept of depositional systems and a memorable symposium in 1969 titled Delta Systems in the Exploration for Oil and Gas. This became the key publication of its time. These days, many crucial concepts of Frank's work are now routinely taught and used in industry and academia, including the term that Frank coined, systems tracks. Frank was one of the early developers of seismic stratigraphy. In 1972, Frank and Bill began a joint 10-year consulting venture with Petrobras studying Brazilian basins when they developed seismic stratigraphic interpretations that led to their memorable contribution to the AAPG Memoir 26 in 1977 on seismic stratigraphy. Frank articulated his ideas from a direct principle basis and logically extended the concepts of depositional systems into their 2D seismic stratigraphic signature. Frank also showed the breadth of his field by working in modern depositional systems and environmental geology. He worked on the Texas coastal zone and other areas to emphasize the impact of coastal processes and planning. This began in the late 1960s and continued through the mid-1980s. He published on many aspects of his work with several BEG researchers. These were some of the first modern coastal studies done anywhere in the world. What has impressed me most about Frank is his ability to stay open-minded, his willingness to change his approaches to stratigraphic evaluation. In mid-career, in fact, Frank admitted that some of his earlier work was flawed and needed modification. I think that there's a message here for all of us. This change in approach happened when Frank worked closely with 3 groups of geoscientists from SOCOR in 1987 to 89 who were doing regional exploration on 3 offshore South African basins. This work was eventually published in an AAPG tome in 1996. The atlas remains one, if not the best, publication illustrating how to do regional sequence stratigraphy and basin analysis by integrating different kinds of data. I was fortunate to be one of the 2 reviewers of this atlas, and I still use many aspects of this atlas in my graduate and industry classes. In 1999, Frank returned to the Bureau of Economic Geology, where he has worked on a variety of projects, including a reevaluation of the work earlier at the Bureau on Oligocene growth faults in South Texas that led to new exploration concepts in mature basins, as well as a compilation of the Cenozoic stratigraphic evolution of the northern Gulf margin. This latter project has produced a 20-foot-long chronostratigraphic chart of the region. Scott Tinker tells me that he is truly proud to say that this is the longest publication in the 101-year history of the Bureau. I'm glad you laughed, because Paul told me if that didn't get a laugh, I needed to look for a new career. Yeah. In the final analysis, there are two elements that all Powers medalists share. First, they are extraordinary teachers. And second, they are also great mentors to many geoscientists. As a teacher, Frank has been on a mission to disseminate important stratigraphic concepts to companies. He has done this by teaching short courses in more than 40 countries to thousands of geoscientists in hundreds of companies, originally in depositional systems, later in seismic stratigraphy, and most recently in sequence stratigraphy. As a mentor, Frank has been incredibly influential to many individuals and companies in different countries. He was recognized twice in 2008 for these contributions by the AAPG. He received the Pioneer Award, and he received a special award from the Geological Society of South Africa, who specifically honored him for his guidance and passion in being a mentor and teacher to so many South African petroleum geoscientists. I believe the true mark of all great mentors is that they continue to work alongside you after they have worked with you physically. They become an internal guide that we use in our work for evaluating our progress, for measuring our standards, for pushing ourselves to always go the additional step, and sometimes to pursue the path not taken. Whenever I complete a major project, I always ask myself one simple final question. Have I been as thorough in my analyses as Frank would have been had he worked with me on the project? And I often find myself returning to do more work because indeed I have not been as thorough and complete as I should have been, and I'm also reminded how fortunate I am that Frank continues to work with me to this very day. On a personal note, I was saddened that Paul could not be here and honor Frank in person, as he was so looking forward to it. I thank Paul for asking me to stand in, and I'm honored to do this. As chairman of the Advisory Council, and also as the director of the Bureau for the last decade, I really swell with pride and I stand in awe of Frank Brown. His commitment, his drive, his passion crossed 6 decades. I'm going to say that differently. I turned 50 last year, and Frank was contributing meaningfully before I was even born. Folks, without question, Frank Brown is the Cal Ripken of geology. Ladies and gentlemen, it's truly one of the highlights of both Paul and my professional careers to present to you the 2010 Sidney Powers medalist, Dr. Frank Brown.
I want to thank Paul Weimer for such a flattering citation. There are many people in AAPG who I am sure are better qualified for this award and honor than I, but as I told my wife, I'm not going to turn it down. I graduated from University of Wisconsin Graduate School 60 years ago, and I've been a member of AAPG for 55 years. And I just want to indicate how important AAPG has been to me. It has allowed me to continue my education through short courses and through field trips, special publications and memoirs, and through the annual or through the monthly bulletin. It's an incredible organization that has allowed people like myself to keep going beyond the academic type of education and go on into a more professional type of education. Thank you, AAPG, very much for this award.